welcome to Trailblazing Tex. And today we have two familiar faces. So we have Darryl Blackburn with us, and we have Sergeant Donovan joining us again. And so the point of this conversation is that there was actually a lot of great feedback on both episodes with Sergeant Donovan and also Darryl. And so we thought bringing them together to kind of have a further conversation just was a good opportunity to sit down, especially during kind of these crazy times. So I appreciate you two coming back. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to answer some questions and we're going to have some dialogue and, you know, have conversations like normal people are capable of having today. So one thing I do want to kind of just for those who maybe didn't watch the other episodes, an opportunity for you both to introduce yourself. So Darryl, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first? Sure.
My name is Darryl Blackburn, born and raised Houstonian, grew up on the South Side, close to Hobby Airport. I'm a petroleum engineer by degree. That's why I'm a lover of baseball and politics and crawfish and barbecue. But most of all, I think I like dialogue and having good, positive communication with people. And so that's why I'm happy again to be invited on your platform, Brittany.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And one random thing about crawfish, I found out on Friday that in Wyoming, they have crawfish season right now. And so I had crawfish on Friday and it was crazy. But anyway, we'll talk about that another time. All right, Sergeant Donovan, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Lee Donovan. I'm not from Houston. I was born in New Jersey, actually. Grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas, and ended up here through finding jobs and everything else. Like you pretty much said all of my interests too. I had football, basketball, and every other sport in there too. But barbecue, crawfish, and having dialogues. I mean, everything you said is kind of in my same boat.
Awesome.
I think that's one of the reasons I agreed to sit here and talk to you is I could tell just listening to you that you're somebody that I could have a conversation with about all this. And
likewise, man.
I appreciate the Brittany bringing us together to talk about everything we got to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to give kudos to both of you also. Again, going back to the feedback, everyone had positive feedback of just the fact that you guys both seem open-minded. You're able to have conversations, the tough conversations. You may disagree on things. We all may disagree on things, but we can still have the conversation respectfully and just continue the dialogue. So I definitely think that's important. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. And the first question, I'll give you kind of the floor to answer first, Darryl, and then Sergeant Donovan, you can go ahead. But why do you think everything has come to such a head right now? Why do you think society is so divided? And how do we fix it to become united again, or, you know, just to become united in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, I think in terms of things coming to a head right now, I would have to say that I think this is the first time in society, maybe not the first time, but we're in an age of our society where things are just getting filmed, right? I don't think that, especially when we talk about things like injustice, police brutality, just crime statistic, whatever it is, like we now have a different set of sources that we can rely on. You know, in our parents' generation, whatever Walter Cronkite said was like, that was what it was. And nobody questioned it because you just have one source.
Right.
But now, especially with the emergence of social media and instantaneous news sources that aren't instantaneously verified, or I think that's a big catalyst to a lot of passionate polarity that we see right now, is the fact that a lot of people just blame everything on the media, blah, blah, blah. And you can do that. And that's an easy answer. But I don't think like police brutality necessarily is a new thing at all. I think that it's being filmed. I think that just as a whole, things are so easily accessible, more accessible than ever before. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing. Because like I said earlier, just because something is accessible doesn't mean that it's accurate. And so more than ever before, people have information that's being fed to them like a fire hydrant, being force fed to them. And that information can also not necessarily be accurate. It's more opinionated than ever before. We've always known that crime sells. That I know if you're in media, the term is if it bleeds, it leads, right? And it's true, because that's what gets people fearful, and fear drives viewership, and viewership drives revenue.
Yeah.
And right now everything is just bleeding, and it's because there's so much viewership, because there's so many avenues that people can force feed information to you. And then because of that, there's just so much revenue everywhere. So I can go down that rabbit hole all day long, but I think that that's kind of where we are right now as a country, where we need to decide, am I going to allow myself to continue to be force-fed, unverified information? And then if I do get information that's valid, that affects me or doesn't necessarily affect me, how am I going to respond to it? Am I going to respond to it with opinions, or am I going to respond to it with compassion, patience, understanding, things like that? So it's a long roundabout answer.
Fair enough. And all right, Sergeant Donovan.
Well, I think he pretty much hit the nail on the head with all of that. I think a lot of the divisiveness with what we have going on, that why it came right now, is because I think he mentioned in mine and in his previous podcast as well, is that right now emotions are running high with COVID and everything else. Like there's everybody is just on edge in every different circumstance of life, based on their jobs or what's going on, based on what's going on in society. And then when he said viewership, about everybody being accessible and being able to see everything that's going on. And we're in a, buy now society where you have one click and you get it. And it does the same thing before you verify anything on Facebook or Instagram. And if it hits an emotional trigger, so if something is emotionally triggering to you and you see it and it offends you, you hit share, you hit send, you send it to everybody and you spread it before it can do anything. And it almost throws gasoline onto a flame with what's going on. It's not saying that and we're not talking about any specific incidents, obviously, but just in general, when you're talking about politics, or when you're talking about anything, and you get that emotional reaction and you just hit send and it hits something in you, and now it's hit somebody else. Now it hits somebody else, and it just keeps going and spreads like wildfire before the truth is even really out there about whatever it is. And it could be a discussion on either side. If you get into politics, right or left, it happens everywhere. It doesn't happen on just one side. It's just spread everywhere.
Yep.
Right now, I do think that, I can't say the word unplug, but it's one of those things where if we just got off of the thing on social media, because it's one of those times in our lives where social media has connected everybody that would not normally be connected through everywhere. But at the same time, we are less truly connected. We rely on connecting through Facebook and through sharing information that way, instead of sitting down at a table and talking face to face, because I see so many comments negatively from one side or the other on these all different types of issues. And the way it's come across, the wording that is used, the vulgarity that's written there, that you wouldn't say to somebody in their face. You know what I mean? Like you'd have a normal conversation about this, but because you hit send when you're so emotionally charged. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things, like don't send an email when you're upset. Like slow down and read it. But we've given the platform to Facebook and Instagram where you can just hit send and share it and share it and share it without any type of editing mechanism where you take the emotion out of it and use a rational mind to actually think about what's happening.
Sure.
As far as fixing it, I think true conversations, getting people in positions of power, as he talked about in his last podcast, that can actually make a difference with this stuff. Responsible people that are actually providing this information to the public. You just said a second ago, like Walter Cronkite was the only source a while back. Well, now you have 50,000 different people out there sourcing information, but nobody's verifying it before we hear it. And I think too many of us take it for granted and, take it as Bible verses that what's being told us and what's being fed us is true. And I think that needs to be something that we all work on. And I'm guilty of it too, because I get an emotional reaction.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most part, is that when you see something and it provides an emotional response to you, you have that knee-jerk reaction to just hit send or make a comment or do something when it's not in your normal nature to do that. But they've done what they're trying to do by an elicit an emotional response from me, whether that's good or bad. And it causes so many different emotions to clash at the same time that it's like one of those things that cooler heads need to prevail. And calm down and have a conversation. And there's a problem here, but is it really this? It should be something else. And I think dialogue is the only way,
Mm-hmm.
and then an open mind on both sides to realize that I am not a perfect human being.
Right.
I don't know everything. I don't know the right way to do everything. And there's going to be a lot of other people that have different experiences that are going to be better than me. And listening to them, talking, having the conversations. And I think right now, the biggest thing to fix this country is taking a deep breath. Everybody taking a deep breath. Let's sit down. Let's figure this out. Because if we're trying to make decisions when we're emotional, it's never going to be the right choice.
Yeah. And I think we're almost pinning each other against each other, and it's just counterproductive at this point, right? And before I move on, though, Darryl, do you have anything else to add before I follow up with another question?
No, not on that. Like I said, that's we're going to completely agree on that. Yeah, I mean, this is how I think. Sergeant Donovan and I are probably a good representation of the bulk of society. In terms of how we feel about, humanity as a whole, right? And I think that one of the big problems is that we only see the snapshots of like the worst of our society at all times. And then you have people who are forced to make comments about the worst in our society, whether it's, you look at people hijacking protests or showing up to different events on all sides, right? But those are such a minority in our society, in my opinion. But we're forced to always comment on
the worst
of people. And it's like that, in so many different facets. But I don't have anything necessarily to add to what he said there.
All right. So just to move on, just kind of moving down this list. And for those who are listening, we kind of compiled a rough list of questions just to kind of keep the conversation on point. But my next question is, since both of you guys live in Houston, this is something that I have observed from afar in Denver, but why do you think Houston hasn't reached the level of violence and the riots and the chaos that cities like Portland, Seattle, Chicago, and others have reached? What do you think makes Houston different in that sense? And I'll start with Sergeant Donovan.
Okay. Well, I mean, Darryl, you're like natural, man. You like transition to this when you talk about hijacking protests and everything else. Because a lot of this started, with George Floyd and the protests going on with that. But there were people that, and you've seen this in the cities, especially like Portland and Seattle, where those protests have been hijacked and turned into a movement for Antifa. You know what I mean? When it completely takes away from the message that was trying to be sent by the peaceful protesters and to protest everything that was happening at the time. And it's turned into this anti-fascist movement this has nothing to do with police brutality. I mean, it's a completely different subject going on there. Now, but you're also talking about two different types of violence. The violence of what's going on in Seattle and Portland for Antifa versus the violence in Chicago. The violence in Chicago it's heartbreaking. When you're seeing the amount of shootings that are happening every single day, but those are more related to gang and street violence, whereas the ones in Portland and Seattle are the anti-fascists that are trying to take down the establishment and take over areas of the town and everything else. So it's two different types of violence. What's going on in Chicago is it's horrendous. When it's just citizens on citizens, and it's not an us versus them, it's people hurting each other. And I don't live in Chicago. I don't know all the statistics. I know the statistics on the shootings, but I don't know everything about it on how we could fix that, other than we go back to the basic thing of having human compassion for other people. You know what I mean? If you don't have regard for another person's life as an individual, how can I legislate anything that's going to make it better?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Murder's already illegal. You can't legislate evil sometimes. Like, if people are bringing violence upon each other, that's the way it is. The other cities with the violence, it's people that are just fed up with everything going on, and they're trying to hit the reset button. And I personally don't believe in socialism or anything like that. I'm completely against it. Obviously, they think it's the right way to go. But they've turned what is a right in this country of doing peaceful protests into almost a war zone. And that was not what this was set up to do. That's not what anybody should be allowed to do, if you ask me, bringing violence to a peaceful protest. One thing we did do here well in Houston is those protests were by and large peaceful on both sides. The protesters here were amazing. They did their job. And you could hear, even when they're using loudspeakers and talking, you could hear the passion in their voice because the topic meant something. It means something. It hurt them and it hit them emotionally. And you could hear that coming across when they're talking to us across the lines.
Mm-hmm.
But not once when I was there with all the ones that were coming across did we get hit in the head. Now, there were a couple instances where there's agitators,
Right.
in the crowd that are doing that. But that's the minority, as he said earlier. I mean, it's like he had the natural transition to the next question of what he was saying. But I do think that the city leadership here, I think that the citizenry here, I think that the police department here, being the fact that we are very diverse and we're pretty much spot on with the diversity of our city. This isn't, 95% white police officers, over a minority city. We're very diverse, just like our population is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that has something to do with it. I mean, I don't know the answers to it. I don't want to say it's just dumb luck because I don't have the answers, but there's got to be something to it as far as the way our leadership handled the protests and the way the protest leadership responded with HPD. I mean, it's a relationship where if we're not talking to each other and we're not coordinating, it's going to go bad. And I think that, and this is purely speculation because I'm not in the position of power to be up there with those conversations, but that the communication between the protest leaders and the leadership of HPD in the city was a little bit better than in some other cities where the relationships between them are strained there and they're not as strained here.
Yeah, and when we talked last time, you spoke very highly again of just the protesters working in tangent with you guys of, this is what we want to do. You guys, allowed it, helped it, took the agitators out so people peacefully could protest and voice their opinions, which to me is one of the greatest rights that we have as Americans. So I think that relationship, so again, just as an observer, definitely is a powerful relationship and allowed Houston not to burn to the ground like we're seeing some cities go through right now. So with that, Darryl, what is your take on Houston and why Houston's been rather civil as compared to other cities?
I think also that's a tough one to answer. Like why specifically
Sure.
Houston hasn't had the oversaturation of violence and rioting and that kind of thing. I think he mentioned, a lot of good points of why, why it could be different here. It just kind of is. I mean, we do have better, we do tend to be a little bit more content with leadership in this city than others. You look at the police chief, Acevedo, he's very liked. He's very well respected. Our Harris County judge, Lena Hidalgo's respected. So I feel like there is a better relationship between citizens and leadership in this city versus other places. One thing that I will comment on is like I think it's very easy. We hear it a lot, the comparisons to Chicago. In Chicago, it's just like a very what's the word? It's just a very easy narrative sometimes to like deflect to. Not that I disagree with you, but like from a statistical perspective, just crime rate versus population in this country, 2019, Chicago was the 29th deadliest city in this country. The 28th deadliest city in this country was Houston. The 30th deadliest city in this country was Lubbock. So, like in terms of crime rate per population per capita, Chicago, a lot of it's an easy narrative because the numbers are high, right? If you look at the number of homicides, the number is high. If you say it was 20 yesterday or 600 for the year, but relative to the population, it's like 29th in the country. And that's 2019 statistics. One of the reasons why I think that are the years and years of redlining that occurred in states like that, whereas Houston's kind of been able to circumvent some of that thing with some of the past redlining legislation due to lack of zoning. But in Chicago, the Black population lives in like one pocket of the city.
Right.
And it's just hyper focused on this one part of the city geographically. And yes, there are a lot of gang violence. I completely agree with that part, that the violence there is usually limited to, the gang violence there. And anytime you have cities that have a crime rate, naturally, data shows that they usually have high poverty rates and unemployment rates as well.
Mm-hmm.
So where there is a lack of opportunity, there's going to be high crime because there's desperation. So just in 2019, the number one deadliest city in the country was Detroit, Michigan, right? And that poverty rate was 37.9%, and the unemployment rate was 9%. In Chicago, that same poverty rate with the same statistical measurement was 12 points less, right? It was 21%. So high, but not as high as Detroit.
Yeah.
And relative to the population, Detroit's the deadliest city in the country. But there's also a correlation between lack of opportunity and crime rate, right? That's kind of human nature. So I think that when we talk about, like I said, it's very easy it's a very easy narrative to deflect to. It's not an incorrect narrative, but
it's easy.
You don't hear about it. Like, I think the second most, one of them is Buffalo, New York. Buffalo, New York is the 9th most deadly city in the country, but people don't talk about it because Buffalo is 76% white. And I think that when people in Chicago, the crime rate is talked about so much because it's a very easy deflection from the Black Lives Matter movement. It's like, well, if Black Lives Matter, why not Chicago? Because Black people are killing themselves in Chicago. Well, it's like they're doing the same thing in Buffalo. It's just white people are killing themselves in Buffalo. Mm-hmm. South Bend, Indiana is another one. South Bend, Indiana is an extremely deadly city, 69% white. But the crime is going to happen, right? Homicides occur in this country. The problem and the reason why we're even here in the first place is not because crime is any higher than it's ever been. It's because justice is probably lower than it should be. And I think that's where we're at as a society, where we're meeting with a kind of a revelation on who we are as a society relative to justice, not crime, because we haven't been figured out how to solve crime.
Sure.
A lot of times, especially, I know you want to talk about defunding the police.
That'll be the next question. If you want to just take us there, you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment one part on that. Everything you were saying is correct, right on. And I think I went on the wrong direction because I was just trying to correlate the difference between like the violence you're seeing in Seattle and Portland versus Chicago. I wasn't really trying to say that, Houston's better than Chicago when it comes to that, or even Buffalo or anywhere, because like there was the last part of what you said was spot on. And I think that crime is going to happen. You know what I mean? You can't legislate that because people, if you have laws in the books and people are going to break the laws, I mean, you can't legislate hate. You can't legislate human dignity and the way people take that. But I think I was more talking about just the specific differences between the violence that you're seeing in cities where the unemployment rates are low and everything else versus the violence you're seeing in Seattle and Portland right now, due to these people that are just taking, the Black Lives Matter movement and using that first initial jump off when they had their protests and turning it into something that is violence against a completely different thing.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you at all, especially on the hijacking protests. However, I think what's happening in Portland is a little bit more reactive than that. So I think that initially, just like every other city, most cities in this country, large cities in this country, are on like the 30th and 40th days of consecutive protests, right? Well, Portland,
it's like almost on 60.
Yeah, something like that. Well, but why I said it was more reactive was I think it did probably start as the Black Lives Matter march, just like other places, and then it could have gotten hijacked. I think I don't necessarily subscribe. Not that this is a wrong. Not that I disagree with it. I just don't necessarily describe to the Antifa as a movement. I mean, I don't have enough research or evidence. I just haven't seen enough that makes me believe that they're organized enough to be the masses of those people that we see. I just don't know. But one thing we have seen about Portland, if we're going to talk about Portland, is the emergence of these federal police, right, who are unmarked, unnamed, and who are arresting people and taking people into custody, which is a whole separate issue that we haven't seen in this country probably ever. So I believe that, and I want you to come because I don't know about this, but one thing that what I'm taking from what I've seen about what's going on in Portland, you have these marches, whether they get hijacked or not, the populations are growing out in the streets. Then these unmarked federal police are coming in, and then these crowds are growing even more because we're like, wait, what? Who the hell are these guys?
Yeah.
How are you taking people into custody? That we have a First Amendment right to peacefully protest and the freedom of speech, and then you have, I think, the Fourth Amendment. Correct me if I'm wrong, which is the right for unlawful searches and seizures. Which those are the two that we're getting two constitutional rights like violated at one time. And I think it's really starting to trigger a lot of people. There's people coming down from the entire Pacific Northwest to these pockets who are probably more so there to be like, who the hell are these dudes and how did we get here?
Yeah.
And then we've heard the president acknowledge it very minimally. He hasn't really come out and say, yeah, we did dispatch a whole bunch of secret police to Portland. But one thing he did say was that we're going to do it in Chicago.
I think they already did.
Yeah, or if they're not there, they're on the way. And he did acknowledge that whatever's going on there, and this is where you get this underlying politicized message of fear is driving people to a level that we haven't seen before because they're responding to something that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that I've never seen this type of presence of federal police outside of maybe the border wars.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
So that's what I think is going on there. Not that I disagree with anything that you said earlier, but that's my take on what's going on in the Pacific Northwest right now.
Okay. And so just to respond, everything you're saying is absolutely correct. And I value all of those rights just like anybody else. The way I took this, and again, I'm getting my information from Facebook or from the news or from everybody else that's doing this. And they're taking snapshot pictures and then blowing it out there saying these unmarked guys are doing it. From my understanding, okay, a while back, I mean, again, this happened and people were up in arms for a day or two, and then it kind of got shoved under the rug. Antifa was named a terrorist organization earlier this year by President Trump, right? So when they do that, they are now allowed to use the federal troops to make those arrests. Because normally you wouldn't bring federal troops in on to interact with anything. But in the case where it's a terrorist organization, like a terrorist cell, when they were going after ISIS or going after people that they were, connected to ISIS here in the United States, right? Mm-hmm. Federal troops were the ones that were making those arrests, or the federal government agencies were the one, FBI or whatever, were the ones doing that. Now that you've branded Antifa as a terrorist organization, it opens up that rule where you can use the federal forces to go after that because that's in the interest of national security. No longer a municipality or state organization, but the national security because they are considered a domestic terrorist group. So if they are going to that, they've specifically targeted that person that they're going after. It's not like they were arresting 50 people and throwing them in the back of a van. Mm-hmm. It's like they had a target because they've done their research, they've been tracking and following or doing whatever they were doing, and they were picking out that guy as the Antifa terrorist and getting him out of there. That's how I took it. From my knowing of the thing, I was not there. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I haven't taken it. But from my interpretation of it, once he declared that Antifa was a terrorist organization, that opened up a whole different type of engagement from the federal government with that specific protest.
And go ahead.
As far as going to Chicago, I haven't heard that. I haven't seen it. I don't know anything about it. And again, this is not me speaking from a person of HPD. This is me speaking just from my understanding of what's going on up there as to why that possibly is happening. But again, you take that incidence where you're saying that the people are coming from all over because this right's been violated, this right's been violated. Well, yeah, if a federal troop came and like just started marching down the city of Houston and started grabbing people, throwing them in the back of the truck, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that it's a narrative that's being spun to get those people excited, to get people upset. And naturally, if you're saying my rights are being violated, we're going to stand up and fight this. Well, we should. We should fight against our rights being violated. But I don't know for a fact that that's what was happening.
Right.
You know, like
I think the what I worry about politically regarding charging Antifa with being a terrorist organization is the fact that the Ku Klux Klan is not a terrorist organization, and the Proud Boys are not a terrorist organization, and there are it's politically a great opportunity for the president to label a far left group terrorist organization, so that we could have these. We only see these protests in the most liberal states in the country, right now, and that's where Antifa happens to be, right, in Portland, in Washington. But when we see a 1,000 person march of Proud Boys with torches and pitchforks, following the massacres of I want to say it was the first time that I'd ever seen it in those numbers was on the anniversary of the South Carolina shooting, the church shooting, the Charleston church shooting. But there was 100,000 Klan Proud Boys, and there's a great opportunity to label that group a terrorist organization, but it's South Carolina. It's a demographic of people who are probably going to vote his way. So we can see politically that there is a kind of a disconnect in terms of, all right, if we're going to call Antifa that, that's cool, but let's get these guys too.
I agree.
And I think, unfortunately, because of how polarized we are as a nation right now, the playing field is not, is not widely cast. But I'm sure we can talk down this rabbit.
No, and I agree. I also didn't know that the response
That's
the federal troops was because Antifa had been designated as a terrorist organization. That's good to know, but also it seems rather convenient at the same time, right? So I'm with you, Darryl, in the sense where it's like, okay, we're going to name them this. I don't know enough about them to deem them a terrorist organization or not, but it is what it is. But at the same time, we have on the other side, the KKK, that there's no reason that they should not be deemed the same. So there is some disconnect there, but Sergeant Donovan, I actually appreciate you shedding light on.
Yeah, that is something I did not know.
I did not know.
Well, and again, that's my interpretation of the way I saw it, because I mean, there's no person in this United States that should be able to rationalize having troops just show up and grab random people.
Right.
So me picking my brain, trying to figure out, okay, well, that's the news story that came out. Why would that possibly have happened?
Right.
Are we talking about a group of 55 people? Are we talking about one individual they pulled out of a protest? Are we talking, I mean, I just don't have enough true information.
Yeah.
But that's the avenue that I could see. And you're right. I mean, if they're labeling one group of terrorists and one's not, but I don't have the information in front of me.
Right.
To know why they made that choice, not the other. Could it be political? That's so far above my set, and it depends on what you truly believe.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great conspiracy about it or not. I don't have the numbers in front of me to support why it should be or shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I personally, being with HPD and everywhere else, we have had extensive training on Antifa, so I can verify. I mean, it's real. It's really out there. There is not a stronghold here in Houston, from what I'm aware of, but we are trained on it. It's something that is brought up because it's a real group.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the classification on why they were specifically named domestic terrorists. I mean, is it
right? When's the last time they walked into an elementary school and shot something up? I don't know.
I don't know either. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have the answers on everything. I don't see these back page manifestos on people that have done stuff. Like, I don't have access to it to understand the true dynamic.
I have a folder full of manifestos here. Give me 1 second.
All right. Let's move on, because I think we're starting to get to kind of the role that police officers or law enforcement, or even, I guess, someone like federal troops play in society. So what does, is the floor back to you, Darryl? Or is it Sergeant Donovan? I don't remember.
It's on him, I believe. It doesn't.
Okay.
We'll go back and forth. It doesn't matter.
So Darryl, starting with you, what does defund the police mean to you? And how do we move forward to mend the relationship between police and communities, do you think?
Yeah, so that I know that's such a touchy trigger word right now, defund.
Yep.
Because it just I think people are misinterpreting defund versus abolish, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think you're going to find very many rational people who want to fully abolish the police,
sure,
right, as an entity. Some people might say that. That is a word that has been thrown around. But defunding it's interesting that we're having an issue defining what this means, because we do it all the time as a society. We defund education all the time. We defund Planned Parenthood. People want to defund Planned Parenthood. People want to defund, social organizations and public, networks. We do it all the time as a society. But now it's kind of weird that it's like such a trigger word. But to me, what it means is to analyze the budgets of our police forces throughout the country and determine how those funds are being allocated, how those funds are being utilized, right? For instance, one thing that which is kind of ironic, because I do have a problem with federal police being unmarked and dispatched at the will of the president. But I also have a problem with a local police force having access to military, equipment, and if you go to a march and you expect to see police there, why are they in full military fatigue, gas masks and tanks, and different police forces have different access to these things and different funds, but it's just interesting to see a militarized local police force that I think is rarely necessary. I understand you have SWAT teams and stuff, but to militarize an entire squadron, I've always found to be excessive. Another thing is if you look at the most of the revenue besides our taxes that go to funding the counties and ultimately funding the city, or specifically if you look at the revenue that funds most police forces, are going to be from traffic stops. So there was a study done, that said 30 million people a year experience traffic, police-initiated traffic stops, right? And from that number, 24 million or so, I wrote this down, sorry, 30 million people a year experience police-initiated contact in general, 30 million people. Of those 30 million, 24 million are from traffic stops, right? And so I think that when we talk about the police budgets, what we are asking cops to do on a daily basis, I think in 2020, we can start to truly analyze, all right, how are we getting these violent interactions between cops and citizens? If we were to somehow find ways to reduce the number of contacts, if the number is 30 million a year where police initiate contact, or police initiate not necessarily a confrontation, that's got a bad connotation, but just initiate a meeting between themselves and a citizen. If that's 30 million people a year, and 24 million of those instances are traffic, let's attack traffic, right? There's no data that shows that traffic citations lead to less traffic deaths. Traffic deaths have been declining over time for the last 15 years, but most of that is for two reasons, and I've done all this research, because I was very surprised to see that the vehicular mortality rate has been on a steady decline for 15 years. And I'm like, that doesn't seem, I always heard it's a leading cause of death. There's two reasons why that has been declining. The first reason is because cars are safer. They get safer. Annually, they get safer, right? The second reason is or what's believed to be the inference from vehicular data is younger. There's less young drivers on the road than there was. The bulk of traffic mortality are young drivers. Well, there's an interesting plot that shows as young 18 to 24, as the poverty rate and the unemployment rate for 18 to 24 increases, vehicular traffic mortality rate of that same demographic decreases, right? So if they're not working, they're not driving to work. Mm. And that demographic, 18 to 24, the unemployment rate has been increasing over time, slowly, but it has been. And so has the vehicular mortality rate. It's a very interesting study that was done. So I say all that because I think the bulk of the cause of unnecessary interactions between police are usually of the vehicular frame, right? We see Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, you know, you could just go on and on of the people that we know and don't know. And it's like, man, why did you pull me over, right? That's such a, it's always such a tense moment, especially for Black people, because we just feel a certain way when we get pulled over. And I think that there's a way to remove discretionary policing, right? If you're a hall monitor when you're a kid and two people are late to class, and one of them is your friend and the other one is a kid that you don't like, who are you going to give a hall monitor citation to? Probably the guy you don't like. And I think that if you just kind of place that same ideology into humanity in general, not just saying that police think that way, but in general, everyone in this country, myself included, Black people, white people, men, women, everybody, we have innate prejudices in us, right? If I go to even though I live, you know, in the hood, grew up in the hood, if I was on the corner and I saw a white man in a business suit and a Black man in athletic gear, something inside me is going to be like, one of those people don't belong here, right? And that's a natural prejudice. That's not necessarily something I would call racism. That's just natural. We're naturally conditioned to believe that a Black dude on a corner is probably doing something wrong. We watch enough TV shows that show that. The problem is when that police officer may see that, something in their humanity may cause for a discretionary reaction to those two people, where they would treat the guy in the business suit a different way than they would treat the other kid. Mm-hmm. So I say all of this because the way to, in my opinion, reduce the amount of violent encounters between law enforcement and citizens is to decrease the amount of encounters in general. That's I think the low-hanging fruit there are traffic stops. And then when you get to that point, for instance, they're in the town of Berkeley, California, my last point on this. Berkeley, California is removing all police officers from traffic policing, from like all traffic stops. And this was just passed a couple of weeks ago by their city council. Police officers are no longer doing speeding tickets, wrongful lane changes, running stop signs. There's now going to be a subset of the Department of Transportation, DOT. There's a subset of the Department of Transportation that's now going to handle all vehicular traffic stops from now on. Now, we're going to have to see if that works, but that's going to be a great case study in the next 5 to 10 years. But those Department of Transportation representatives who will be making these citations will be unarmed, right? So you can know if you're in Berkeley, California, and you get pulled over running a stop sign, that dude's unarmed. So you can just say, hey, man, just write me my ticket. Just write me my ticket. So I'm a firm believer in that methodology, which ultimately, if you take that responsibility away from police officers, then you're going to have to probably alter the budget because, hey, you guys aren't going to be making these traffic stops. Maybe we don't need as many, or maybe we need to reallocate responsibility. So that's something that when I hear defund the police, those are some of the things that I start to think about. I know that's a lot to digest because I just went on a soliloquy there. But yes.
No, I think it's hard, right? Like you said, Berkeley's kind of like a case study for us. We have no idea. It might go well. It could be a disaster. It could be kind of a moot point. We don't know. And so I think that's where the question lies, right? Is what is going to work and what's not. And since we don't know the solution or what could or couldn't work, I think it scares people. It scares me at times where you're just like, okay, well, what is the solution going to be? And is it going to work? I want it to work, right? I want it to be a solution. But I don't want to take away from Sergeant Donovan. So I'll let you kind of, have your response and anything that you want to address with Darryl.
Okay. So, I mean, when you hear the words like defund police, obviously me being a police officer, that comes at me, you know what I mean? Like I think that the main point of contention is that the way it's presented, and again, it's not of anybody's fault, but it seems very attacking, you know what I mean? And I don't necessarily think that's the way it's supposed to be or the way that they're trying to come across, you know what I mean? But again, it's hard for you, or not you as a person, but somebody to say something and then be completely understanding of how I'm going to take that, you know what I mean? So when you hear the words abolish versus defund, I mean, it is two completely different things. But even when you say defund the police, it sounds very attacking. Because you have that thing like, what, they're going to take money away from me? You know what I mean? That's how everybody's thinking. And then it also kind of thinks like that, it makes you have that point of view like, okay, well, I'm not very valuable to you then. I guess I don't do a good enough job. I guess, 100 different things. But I think the main point is, what's exciting people is just the terminology. You know what I mean? Like, we're always constantly having to change how we do things anyway. I mean, I'm a firm believer. I listen to podcasts. I listen to, self-help stuff as much as I possibly can. And a couple of them, you listen to them and you hear stuff like, if you're not growing, you're dying. So, I mean, there should be no person in this United States, whether you're private business or whether you're public or whether you're police officers, that sits here and thinks that we are doing everything perfectly correct, because we're not. There's always room for growth. There's always room for improvement. And if you think you're perfect, then we're wrong, period. Now, there's going to be different ways, but I do think that you can't say that something doesn't work until you try it. Now, sure. Do I think there should be broad sweeping change across it when you talk about the traffic stops or anything else? Because at what point do you go? Because right here, especially in Harris County, we are the number one county in the nation for DWIs and DWI deaths.
Yikes.
I mean, we are. So our police officers no longer going to respond to those? Or, how do you, because a lot of times that comes from switching lanes of traffic when illegal. You know what I mean? Like it changes the dynamic. Or you get somebody, 2:00 in the morning that is pulling out from a club and they run over a curb. Are we not supposed to enforce this? So where do you draw the line as to where the interaction comes from? And I'd be really interested if you could, I'll get your email. Send me that study. I mean, I love to educate myself as much as possible and read studies for everything. Because one of the things that we look at too is the total police interactions, whether it's initiated by us or we're called out. I mean, even in the thing of like George Floyd, the police were called out there. Now it's for something, it could be of insignificance of a $20 bill, you know what I mean? But that wasn't just a police officer driving around and be like, hey, I'm going to go grab that guy.
Right.
They were called out there for a reason. So the issue with that is we have 300 plus million interactions, every single year. And there are, multiple, and one is too many, frankly, one is too many if it's gone wrong and somebody tragically lose their lives because somebody made a bad choice. But there's so many that go right that never get attention.
Oh yeah, for sure. And go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, and so going back to defund the police, police right now in America are being called on to do so much more than they ever have in history. I mean, we're having to be counselors and marriage therapists, and people are calling us when they're going through divorces and they have to go pick up their stuff from the other person's house. And
that's a problem.
It is 100%.
That's a problem.
And one of the biggest ones that we run into right now, that if you ask other police officers, that we hate, because it leads to that whole idea of the police being bad, is when you get a call from the parent saying, my kid won't go to school. I need you to get him up and take him to school. Because now we're turning into that role. Well, they're asking us to go get their kid out of bed for them and drag him to school, when that's not a police officer's responsibility.
Yeah.
That's you as a parent. Like, you are the one in charge of your kid. Like, don't threaten me taking him to jail because he doesn't want to listen to you. You know what I mean? Like that's not our role. Or you'll see even, when we're just getting out of a car to go into a Valero or something to get a Coke in the middle of the night. or not in the middle of the night, hopefully it's not in the middle of the night, but middle of the day. And a mom would be like, or they're having an argument with their kid, and they're like, I'm going to tell that police officer to take you to jail if you don't listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, and that just breeds that thing of where we are the bad guy, you know, like and it's hard to fight that. So when you say defund the police, yes, that is a negative term. When you're talking about reallocating and using best performance methods to make this a safer community, if you say it like that, who's going to?
Yeah, because we're actually saying the same thing.
You are, but I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. It's just the way it gets spread. And we talked about that whole click now, send when it hits defund the police. Well, if you just change the wording to, you know, investing in our communities, or, you know, whatever it is, without saying that word, it's been happening for years anyway. When you said you take away from education, you put it over here, you take away from here, you do it, but you're constantly growing. And if you're afraid of that, then you're wrong. But it's that terminology that comes across that just instills like that emotional response again, to where you want to instantly fight it and defend it and say it's wrong. When in reality, if we sit here and talk about it, it's just like any other business. And you're sitting there, what are the best practices we can do to make this a safer city for all of us? Yeah. Because there should be a natural interaction between law enforcement and citizens where it's all mutual respect.
Sure.
And it's just gone awry.
And I actually have two things on that. Is I had another officer, Officer Ari Ross, who lives in Columbus, Ohio. She kind of said the same thing, where she was like, we have created now a culture, or it's just become a societal norm of don't know what to do, call the cops. And it could be good, bad, and different, right? It could be everything from my cat is stuck in the tree to I need to get my son out of bed to go to school, or hey, someone is robbing my house, right? Like we all of a sudden they're like, oh, call 911. And that's not necessarily the response that needs to be done, because like you said, like you often then are kind of casted in this weird negative light and asked to do things that you don't necessarily need to be doing. And then defund the police, back to Darryl's point of like how we defund things or move dollars around or distribute them differently. No, that's nothing new, right? But I do think the term defund the police was used tactfully. I think it was to elicit a response 100%, because all of a sudden it's just like, well, what do we mean? And so for the most part, to Darryl's point too, is most people aren't saying abolish the police, but some people are. And so I think the message is getting lost and it's getting hijacked again, going back to things getting hijacked. And I think that's the sad reality is, again, those minority people, when I say minority, the smaller group of people are making the loudest noise sometimes, and they're hijacking something that could be a positive change. But people have the tools and the resources to hijack things so easily now, right? It's social media. It's you know, being able to shoot a text or an email, you know, showing up to a protest to just completely derail it. You know what I mean? There just seems to be so many avenues where things get hijacked, and it's really frustrating to watch, I think, as a citizen, because you want what's best, but then you see, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, the worst of everything. So then you're like, well, will this work? You know, we get fed so much information that you just naturally have all these doubts for a lot of reasons. But at the end of the day, a lot of us are saying and wanting the same thing. So I think we're all kind of saying something very similar here. Darryl, I know you had a point.
Yeah, just one point to that, because I agree with a lot of it. One thing I completely agree with is that we're asking police to do too much.
Yep.
And I think that's one of our bigger issues, right? Especially when you look at at a fiduciary, budgetary perspective, right? We're asking people to do way too much. And one thing you said was, you know, it was a counterfeit $20 bill, but the police were called. And it's like, that's the scariest part for me as a Black man in this country is, if, in my opinion, and we'll never know this, but if George Floyd was a white woman or a white man, the police probably would not have been called for that instance, right? For that circumstance. Because it was not a threatening circumstance at all, right? I think that the police are called on Black people like a lot. We saw the guy in Central Park, and the lady calling the cops, and she's using her whiteness, unfortunately, and her victim voice to intentionally try to incite harm to this man. She knew what she was doing when she did that. The police should not have been called for a bird watching compliance like situation. That's not the police. The police probably should not have been called for a suspected counterfeit $20 bill situation. I agree. Like, and when we talk back to the using the term defund, what if we just redefined the roles of police in our society? Like, call the police for this, call these guys for that. And I feel like I think, especially when we go back to my earlier point regarding traffic stops, Black people are, I can't make up the term. I had it written down, but Black people are, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but Black people are more likely to be stopped in traffic stops than white people. Black people are more likely to be, per capita, more likely to be met with violence by police over white people. And if those confrontations are avoidable, we need to find a way to avoid those. We don't live in a society where everyone in this country is policed equally. That's the problem. And we probably we're probably too far gone to ever get to a point where everyone in the society is policed accurately or policed evenly. So if we feel like that the way that people police other people is more cultural, American cultural or human nature, then let's use common sense data analysis to try to reduce confrontation and to try to redefine and specifically define the role of police in our society. And if there is another entity that we can create out of this, who can respond to, hey, my cat's in a tree. Well, let's call the cat in the tree people. Or if there is a, hey, my son won't do his homework, let's call that group of social work people to respond to that. Free police up. If you free police up from having to respond to things that they're not probably trained to do, you know, then we can focus more of their time on training them to respond correctly to other situations and increase their level of training for things that we need them to be highly trained to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And one thing that I think the reason why the cops are called so often is because it's easy, right? It's 911.
Yeah. And there's nothing else. There's no 912.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's one thing as we look at these other resources, we need to make them accessible, right? It can't be 1-800 blah, 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 because I think the same thing is going to happen. And I think like the suicide hotline now has like a 3-digit number. So sure. I think if we can do those type of things and teach, your kids like, hey, if you get stuck in the tree, let's call these people. We don't need to call 911 because we need them to like actually respond to emergencies.
Before somebody installs a pool in your backyard, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you dial like 711 for people to come out to inspect the piping and gas lines under you can call a 3-digit number.
I didn't know
and these
that.
folks will show up free of charge to sniff out where the gas lines are in your backyard. And they want you to do that because if you get to digging, you put a lot of lives in jeopardy by trying to take it into your own hands. And that same ideology, I think we can superimpose on that. Like, hey, instead of taking this into your own hands, call this other non-violent number, and you have trained professionals to come and check this out so you don't just put everybody else in danger.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't think it's that hard.
So let's kind of play off of that, because there's been a lot of talk about, incorporating social workers possibly into, I don't know if it's into the police force or ride-alongs. I'm not entirely sure, or responding to calls. But Sergeant Donovan, how do you feel about those type of resources being alongside of you during let's say like a domestic violence call or a child abuse call, and you work in crimes against children anyway. So this might be a good point to just kind of talk about maybe other resources that could be helpful. My concern, this is just my concern, and I'm not a police officer. I'm not a social worker either. My concern is let's say you do roll up to like a child abuse something, right? And you do bring along a social worker, or a social worker responds with you, and things get very violent. And then then what happens to that social worker? You know, me as someone who is not like a trained police officer or trained to deal with those type of conflicts, I feel for those I fear for those social workers of what could come. So I've been hearing that dialogue. So I'd be interested to hear both of your takes on the possibility of weaving them into kind of responses or call responses.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different things, and it's kind of like a transition we talked about when we go back to defund the police, and also this part of it, where you're talking about changing the way things are done. But even going back to when you say like traffic stops, right? When you pull somebody over, you have no idea who that person is. And so I go back to saying like, we had a beloved deputy here, Dollywall, who was shot on a traffic stop, right? Yeah. And he pulled him over for something insignificant or speeding or something.
I remember.
But he had a warrant, and so that's another unknown factor that's thrown in there. So the people that are pulling you over for speeding, right? So they're not going to be armed now, right? In Berkeley, but they're pulling somebody over for speeding. What happens when that person decides not to stop because they know that person isn't going to do it, or they do stop and hey, I can overpower this guy because he didn't even have a weapon. Yeah. And if he finds out that I'm going to jail, then I'm going to jail. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to go to jail.
Right.
So there's so many other dynamics you have to mix in there. And then going back to the ones with the social workers, and this you may or may not know this, we already do that here in Houston.
Good.
We have a CERT program. And so what that is we actually, it's not social workers, it's clinicians. And they ride along and they respond to mental health calls with our officers. So there's an officer that's in the car driving and then a clinician's over here. And that's been a valuable resource on a bunch of those calls. Here in Houston, every single officer is mandated to take the 40-hour mental health course. So they're all crisis intervention certified when they come out of the academy now. So it's a week-long course on nothing but mental health. That's something that we have, but how are you going to pass that on to, Midland PD or, a smaller agency that doesn't have the resources that we do? And so it's hard to say, yeah, social workers can respond to these calls, especially when you're talking about domestic violence or mental health crisis. Those two are inherently dangerous because you're showing up at people when they're at their most volatile. You know what I mean? And you talk about a social worker, if they're putting themselves in that kind of danger, and that's not something that they really signed up for. Now, when you say that they're more trained, like for myself, I have a degree in psychology before I became a police officer. I think it's 80-something% of HPD. We all have college degrees. Another 40% all have master's degrees that are trained out there. I mean, that's a highly educated workforce. You know what I mean? That's working on the streets out here. And plus the extra training we go through every single year. Now, COVID's kind of delayed it, and we're having to do stuff through Zoom meetings and online courses. Yeah. But that's Houston. You know what I mean? Like that's something we do here, but how do you translate that to a department? Even when you talk about smaller agencies around the area, halfway between here and San Antonio, you talk little cities. How do you get that type of education and training to those areas where it's out there, or Waller County, or any other county that doesn't have the resources we do? It's hard. It's a hard sell to get in and do that. Sorry, I think I'm getting a little off topic.
What would you think about this? So, a mixture of the Berkeley minds, the Berkeley format, and because you do bring up a great point. If I'm unarmed and I got to pull over somebody who's got a warrant, but what if, because I keep thinking like, man, it's 2020, like so much should be automated. We went through it in the city like 4 years ago. We put cameras everywhere. And if you ran that stop sign, you just got a ticket to your house, and everybody had a problem with it. Everybody had a problem because it violated all your just whatevers. And we voted that shit out of our society. But my thing is, the reason why, even if I hated getting that picture of me, going through the stop sign, right? Everybody's gotten it. Like you can't deny that that's you. the reason why it works is because it takes the discretion out of the
I agree.
It takes it completely out. It's like you did the crime, you get the fine. You know what I'm saying? And my thing is, let's say I'm unarmed. Let's say I signed up to be an unarmed text citation provider. Why can't I pull over a guy for an improper lane change and use my phone to take a picture of his license plate and send him a citation in the mail from me, ran a stop sign, goes to his house, no confrontation. And then it pulls up. Oh, buddy had a warrant out on him. Now we have a location on a guy that has a warrant out that the police obviously weren't following him on, but you completely remove confrontation from a situation from a guy like me, who I don't have a warrant out. I would prefer not to be pulled over in the middle of the night if I'm going 80 and a 70. I prefer not to be pulled over if I if I rolled a stop sign. Like, I would prefer not to have that confrontation. Why not just you sit in your car and just digitally get in? Because here's another thing, last thing on this. One of the best feelings when you have a confrontation, when you have an interaction with a police officer. I don't like confrontation, but when you have an interaction with a police officer, one of the best feelings is when they say, all right, man, I'm going to let you off with a warning. And you're like, hell yes. I just got a warning. I'm good to go. But like, that's discretion. That police officer could give everyone warnings if he or she wanted to. Could.
Yeah.
They'd probably get reprimanded because, like, wait a minute. You just stopped 25 people for going 90s and 70s and they all got warnings. We need some revenue. Like, why did you give them all warnings?
Yeah.
But the fact that the warning is something that they can have in their back pocket allows for a discretionary, unequal side of policing. Like, How about we just avoid the conversation, bro? Give me my ticket and let me go on with my day.
And I'll say this: when I lived in Houston, I didn't have a problem with the cameras because I was just like, okay, this is actually easier. Because also as a woman, especially like at night, I don't want to be pulled over. Sure. I don't want to. And so I was like, okay. And, for the most part, do I roll stop signs? Sure. But
you gotta stop rolling them stop signs.
I know. But my point is, for the most part, like from a driving standpoint, I follow the law for the most part. Like, I'm sure there's things that I've done, but if I get caught doing it, then all right, give me my ticket. So I was in the same boat where I really was for the cameras because I was like, it just eliminates so much of the headache.
Yeah.
And again, it reduces the tensions because like I've been pulled over a few times, every time for speeding, and I get so nervous. Why am I so nervous? Like I feel like I'm going to get dragged away and put in jail, even though I'm speeding, right? And I'm just going to get a ticket and my insurance is going to go up and my parents would be mad. But I'd always be like the most nervous and why? So I'm with you, Darryl. I think that's a great like proposal, if you will. So Sergeant, I know you have something.
Yeah, well, I'll just say, I get nervous getting pulled over. I mean, like, you see them lights behind, you're like, dang it, like, and you pull over. But it's just a lot of the conversation that's been had is because of what's happened in the past and everything else. It's hard. But even to this day, what I do when I get pulled over is what I've told my wife to do, is what I tell everybody to do, because as a police officer being on this side of it now, when you're pulling over a traffic stop, you don't know who's in that car.
Yeah.
It could be a good person. It could be a bad person. It could be somebody you have no idea. And so we walking up already have kind of, you're kind of worried about it. You're getting that feeling because you don't know what you're walking into.
Yeah.
So, I mean, weather permitting, obviously, in circumstances, but when I get pulled over, all of my windows go down immediately. I turn my car off. I put my car in park, put my hazards on, and both my hands are on the steering wheel when that officer approaches. Mm-hmm. And usually I have my gun in the car.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a police officer. I carry it with me. And when he starts saying, license and insurance, okay. Sir, I also want to let you know I'm going to reach for it over here, but I have my gun. I would feel better if I got out of the car and you got it for me. And that's just something that I do, for me, because, I'm looking back, I'm trying to put him at ease because he is walking up to me, not knowing who I am, not knowing anything about me. And told my wife to do the exact same thing. Now she's got a ticket right now too, so they still get tickets. She's fine. She has a ticket with the HPD officer gave her a ticket. So I mean, it does happen. But
so do you think it's inherent on the citizen to put the cop at ease when you're getting pulled over?
Not inherent. I think it's us as individuals where this is how we can work together to make sure that an interaction goes smoothly. You know what I mean?
So were you saying, Sergeant Donovan, you were saying as the citizen getting pulled over, this is you getting pulled over, you feel that you want to put the police officer at ease because if you know he's not as nervous, then you are safer?
Correct. I mean, it's one of those things that do I demand that that's the way every encounter should be? No. I mean, I'm not going to put that on everybody where it's your responsibility to do that. I just know that if I do that, the outcome is going to be probably in a better fashion because at that point he is already getting at ease knowing that he can look inside all my windows and not see that there's somebody in the back seat, not see that there's a threat that he's walking up to. You know, I'm not going to take off and run the second he gets there because my car is already off. You know, like it's calming the situation down. And I'm doing that as I'm taking it on me to try and de-escalate a situation before it's already even remotely escalated.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
So,
do I really even need to do that knowing that I'm a police officer and everything else? No, but it's just something that I want to do to de-escalate a situation potentially for me. You know what I mean? And I can't make everybody in the world do that. I can't do everything else.
Yeah.
But I know I'm making that officer feel better about that interaction before we've even done it. Because overall, that's what this is. It's an interaction back and forth with me and with somebody else. And it's going to be, if we stay on a positive track, no matter what it is, no matter who engaged it, it's not your responsibility as a citizen to make sure the interaction's positive.
I agree.
Yeah, I guarantee it's not. But at the same time, it doesn't take that much effort to end on a positive note for both sides. And I don't expect that when it happen, but I do know being on the police side of it, especially if you're talking about doing a traffic stop at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, on a car that has dark tinted windows. Like it's a nerve-wracking experience just to walk up to. You don't know what you're walking up to. And even going to a domestic violence call, you're doing all these different things about, I think there needs to be more training on just interactions as people. You know what I mean? It's almost like people see police officers and you're in your uniform and you're not a human anymore.
Sure.
You're not a person. You're the entity, this authority figure that's trying to do something to me. Instead of realizing that we're just people and we whatever we can do to make this interaction a little bit better, we should do. And that goes both ways. If the officer walks up and he's being a jerk immediately, that needs to change.
Yeah.
Because that's not the way to put them at ease. Because you're more likely to get a conversation started by being nice. You know what I mean? Like by engaging. But I think just as people in general, we have the ability to escalate or de-escalate with how we respond to other people.
Sure.
You know, and so if somebody's being a jerk, if you respond back with that same level as a police officer or as a citizen, it's going to keep going like this. And I don't know if it takes cooler heads. I don't know what it takes, but I know that interactions themselves, it's not inherent to do that. It's not the citizen's responsibility. It's not, because I mean, you could pull somebody over that just came from a funeral. You could pull somebody over that just came from something else where they're already agitated.
Yeah.
Or they have a negative previous experience with law enforcement. That's very possible. You know what I mean? Like, oh, great, this guy's behind me again. I guarantee he's going to rip me out of this car and throw me on the ground. And that's already in their mind. So for me to expect every citizen to do that, I mean, that's silly. But I'm saying that's what I do. You know what I mean? To also put him at ease, or she, or whoever it is, knowing that, okay, I'm not a threat. You might give me a ticket. You may not give me a ticket, whatever it is, but I'm not a threat.
Yeah.
And it's just a way to interact with people.
Yeah, I think that, especially inside the Black community, that's the conversation that we have with each other, that my uncles and my dad would have with me, or, whatever. That's the conversation that we have, is do what you can, exactly what you're saying. Do what you can to put that person at ease. I'm in the other camp, because you were kind of saying it almost like you can see it both sides, right? Is that it's not inherent on me as a driver to put a police officer at ease when I get pulled over. That's not my job. I'm not trained to know how to make you feel less threatened. And I think that's what the difficulty is, especially for Black people, is a lot of Black people are going to be immediately perceived as a threat right away, right? If we already know that we're more likely to be pulled over in the first place, that means we're probably more likely to be predetermined to be a threat, just kind of naturally. So that confrontation when the windows go down, which I think is also a good lesson because I've never thought about rolling all the windows down. I think that's something that I'm going to take from this. But when I'm rolling all those windows down, if I'm perceived as a threat already, I think that you're not going to communicate with someone who you perceive as a threat the same way that you're going to communicate with someone who you don't perceive as a threat, right? And so when you're already tense, naturally, thinking something inside you is like, all right, this dude's a threat, might be a threat. It's very rare that I feel like Black people are met with like grace, like
benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, we don't get the benefit of the doubt initially. So, and I know we can get into this, like that's a super long conversation, but that's why I think that number one, compliance, it doesn't save Black people. Compliance gives everyone the best chance. I completely agree with that, but we see time and time again, and I know that these can be cherry-picked stories, but we see time and time again where Black people were compliant or not compliant, but they got killed regardless. And we see all these school shooters who are armed to the T, who are reprimanded alive, or, people who are, I don't know. I just feel like I would love to live in a world where compliance ensured my safety. I would love to live in that world. And I don't know if we are in that yet, where compliance 100% ensures my safety. I got a quick question for you, Lee. What are you in the Houston city limits?
Yeah, so I live in Westbury. You know where Westbury is?
Okay, yeah.
Like Meyerland, just south of Meyerland. Yeah, I live in the city, and I patrolled. When I did patrol, I was up in the Midwest area, so Galleria, but all the way from Gessner and 59 to like 10 and 59. So like some of the worst parts, some of the best parts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. What would you say? Just scanning your coworker networks.
Yeah.
What do you think is the ratio between HPD officers that don't live in the city limits?
Oh, a massive majority do not live in the city.
I got a problem with that. And I think that's another thing that we can change. Not necessarily change, but like another thing that we need to probably start to confront. So a couple weeks ago.
I understand. I'm 100 behind you 100%.
Yeah. And so, I look at it more from a fiduciary perspective, right? So just recently there was a guy who spoke to the city council in Syracuse, New York. I don't know if you saw this guy, basically standing up at a podium, and he's basically saying the same thing. Syracuse, New York, high crime rate, it's, predatory policing, complaints of all these things. But then there's like a suburb where all of the cops live. And there's like 140 staffed cops in this city, and 137 of them live in this one suburb.
Yeah.
And it's like that as well in Ferguson, Missouri. We had that's where the Michael Brown incident. Ferguson is like an 89, 90% Black area, but none of the cops live in Ferguson. They all live in St. Louis, but they leave their homes and go patrol those areas. And the reason why I have a problem with it from a financial standpoint is, if our tax dollars are paying the salaries of a public worker, I'm not singling out a cop any more than I would a teacher, a fireman, a clerk, a judge, whatever. But if our tax dollars are paying your salary, then your salary, you're spending your funds in a suburb, which means that I am paying for the suburb lifestyle the way that I'm policed in Houston. And I think that that's something, I don't know how you change it per se.
Well, I have a couple of ideas on it.
Sure. But that's something I wanted to bring up. And because that's something that's hit me recently is like, we talk about community policing in general, but that's more the psychological aspect of, if I know you, I'm less likely to approach you, or I'm less likely to police you or assume things about you if I know you, right? Which should work. And I think it does probably work. But then, like I said, the problem is we can't have community policing if we don't have enough people from the community who want to police. And so
perfect. That's perfect.
people live out of town and then they come in town and police me in here. You take your salary and your tax dollars, so on and on.
So I'd agree that, and we talk about true community policing. I mean, I want to protect where I live. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I want to do it.
Right.
So when I first patrolled, I lived in the area I patrolled.
Mm-hmm.
The house that I bought when I first promoted, I was a sergeant in the area where I did. So I got to know the school people. I got to know the community leaders. I got to know the civic club leaders. I got to know people here because this is where I live. And the problems that are here are going to affect me. They're going to affect my wife. They're going to affect my daughter. Sure. So those are the things that we all have to be connected to. The one thing, especially in a place like Houston, though, is that it is so expensive to live in the city. You know what I mean? Like the prices here, I've in my life, I'm very fortunate with my wife and everything that we do, like to be able to live here. Mm-hmm. But not everybody can. I mean, police officers make good money, but not really good money. You know what I mean? And some of the houses here, you can't afford them. I mean, you just can't. And so they move out to the suburbs where you can have a house twice as big for half the price, Right. And you can't really blame them for that. Like it's hard to do that. But I mean, there's ways around it. When you talk about, our city council and everything else, when there's always contract battles, when you're talking about pay of police officer, pays of this, right? But what about instead of giving cash, you say, if you buy a house here, your property taxes are half. You know what I mean? Or
I just wrote in my notes here, provide mortgage incentive.
Yes. I mean, incentive.
I think that's a great idea.
I mean, what I'm saying, like, especially when you're talking about county tax dollars or something else, if you want the people to take accountability for the areas they live in, get them to live there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't do it the other way. But when the prices of mortgages are so high here, you know what I mean? Right. Or when you talk about there are some programs right now for like loan forgiveness, right? Yes. When you're with HPD, they pay off your student loans. I mean, if you done something, or they'll do something. There's other incentives besides straight cash that can get somebody to be there. You know what I mean? So instead of saying, "Oh, you have to inflate my pay 20% so that I can afford to live here," you know what I mean? No, we'll cut your taxes. You know what I mean? We'll give you other discounts. We'll cover your city gas bill. You know what I mean? Whatever the case may be.
Man, I really like that because I think of Levittown, New York, was the first suburb in American history. And it was right after World War II, 1947 in Long Island, where when Levittown is being created, it was the first time that there was like funds for suburban development. It had never happened before in American society. But unfortunately, right, you had all these GIs that came back from World War II, and the GI Bill was created and gave white soldiers the ability to have interest-free and no money down mortgages, right? And so it allowed a mass exodus from poverty-stricken sort of lifestyles to where, okay, your dad comes home from the war, we just moved to the suburb because he just bought a house with no mortgage and he didn't have to put any money down. So he has no debt. And that's how, I mean, we can go all into the rabbit hole of how you can pass down generational wealth through home ownership, and that being a reason why Chicago looks like it does, and the reason why Fifth Ward looks like it does is because those people were not allowed to create generational wealth for free. But I like providing incentives for things like that. I would love to be able to incentivize community policing. If all of the cops that are in HPD live in Sugarland and they live in Pearland and they live in Woodlands, because it's cheaper to buy that home in Cypress, like, what can I do to get you in Houston? What if, you buy, what if I could incentivize you by, hey, no money down, no mortgage, or a different interest rate, so to ensure, number one, and you get that money back so easily because then your property taxes are now in Houston, paying for the, so I'm not paying you to live somewhere that place can get your property tax money.
Well, but you're talking about shopping at local businesses, because on a Tuesday night when me and my wife want to go out to dinner, we're going to be shopping local, which is here in Houston.
And that tax revenue is going to this city.
Yeah, I know. And I think we're in agreement on that. I mean, obviously you can't force it, like saying you can't be a police officer unless you live here, but we will incentivize it. We'll make it a part of it.
No, and I think that's a good point, and I'm glad you actually brought that up, Darryl. That was actually a question I wanted to ask, and I just forgot. Okay, so last question that I'm going to ask both of you guys, and I know Sergeant Donovan, you want to definitely talk about this, but around body cams. Are you guys still on, by the way?
I'm here. You're not moving, but I'm here.
We can hear you though.
Jesus. Okay. So around body cams, we talked about earlier about how easily we record things now, whether it's phones, whether it's body cams. So, in your opinion, Sergeant Donovan, what's good about body cam footage? Should it or should it not be released to the public? And if it's not released to the public, why does that happen?
Sure. So I'm all for body cams. They've done great things for policing. It's holding people accountable. It's holding everything. It's holding the officers accountable, but it's also stopping a lot of false complaints, and it's showing the truth of what's going on. I have no issue with them. I say no issue. The one issue I have is that it brings up, when you talk about just even like the red light cameras and everything else, like the reason they got voted down was like, oh, Big Brother's watching us. It's always there. Well, these cameras are always on and they record back. So like if an officer is too slow putting on his seatbelt when the car is moving, we're getting in trouble. Like it's catching all the stuff that has nothing to do with true policing, but it's a little policy violation, and people are getting in trouble for it. So that's a negative, but at the same time, it's a negative that I'll take. It's part of the job. You're gonna have to deal with it. It sucks, but it is. But we've seen such a dramatic decrease in false reports of police brutality going on that subject, because so many people say, oh, this cop beat me, he did this, he cursed me, he did this. And now it takes 2 seconds to look at the body cam and realize that's not true. Or if the cop is doing something wrong, it's viably right there on camera what he messed up on. You know what I mean? Like it's recorded. Like it's hard to dispute that. But I get it's not upset. But when you talk about the release of body cam footage to the public, there's so many different factors go into it. And here with Chief Acevedo and everything else, especially when you talk about contested shootings, but any type of thing where there's a hint of discrepancy in what's going on, he does, at least from what I understand, bring in the family members of the person involved and let them view it first and give them the choice on whether or not they want it released. Because if that's your loved one and they did something wrong, you know what I mean? Like they were cursing and screaming and pulled a gun on a police officer and then ended up getting shot. Do you want that to be the lasting image of your family member that's on the news and spread everywhere? So from what I understand, he gives them that opinion. The other thing that people aren't thinking, when I say, I guarantee you some people are thinking, so I feel naive just saying that out loud, but is the fact that if this is going to be a criminal case against the officer or against the person, now you're talking about true evidence in a trial, and you're releasing that to the public. And what that does is, especially in a place like Houston or somewhere else, is say if the officer, and this is a completely hypothetical scenario, but the officer is involved in a shooting that is questionably justified or not justified, right? And you release that footage, you have now tainted the entire jury pool here in Houston. And you've opened it up to where that officer or that complainant can now demand for a change of venue to some other place where the people that are going to be his jury are not his peers. And the likelihood of a mistrial or something else occurring is huge. So if you truly want the people of Houston to be the determining factor of this, it's hard to throw out evidence on there that's going to mess up your jury pool. And that's speaking from just a law perspective on why that wouldn't be released. Do I think for transparency reasons, everything should be allowed? Yeah. If there's a dirty cop, get him off of my department. You know what I mean? That does not belong. But the point of the matter is sometimes there's a lot more underlying factors to the reasons why they're not being released. Not just to say that there's a cover up or anything else, because I know officers that work in internal affairs and everything else. Times are changing. This isn't the 1930s, 1940s when stuff was so bad. The whole thing of we have each other's back to the end. I have my brother's back in almost every situation. If you were a dirty cop, you are not my brother. You know what I mean? Like, you're not. I won't falsely claim that way. The people that I associate with, the officers that I know none are like that. They're not going to intentionally go out and hurt somebody. They're not going to intentionally do that. Officers are charged with making split-second decisions and then judged like they had the benefit of looking back 20/20 vision and seeing it, when it's hard. They put in a hard choice. And I love the fact that body cams are there, because sometimes it shows that how aggressive, how the adrenaline was pumping, how it was going, and how when you hear these words, you're talking a fraction of a second. They had to make the choice on to pull their gun and shoot, or, see something else. Or if they don't pull their gun, then they get shot. So it's opening up a lot more perspective to people, and I'm all for the body cams. But the one thing I constantly hear is they must be covering up because they're not releasing it. Well, that's not always the truth. That's not the way it works. And especially here, every shooting and every police incident where there's an officer involved death, where they go with it, it has to go to the grand jury for an indictment. It's not an instantaneous thing like where they're going to do that. They gather everything from the entire scene and it gets presented to a grand jury. And so I think that, people right now in America, there's just this, everybody has this urgency to get it done now. Now. I want it now, justice now, everything now. When the whole process of presenting cases for an officer to the grand jury with the body cam footage and everything else was to take it out of our hands. Was it so a third party person that's a grand jury made up of the citizens of this county or this region are the ones looking at all of the information and deciding whether or not to charge. It's not up to the law enforcement agency whether to charge the individual. It's not up to them. It's up to a grand jury of the people. But that's something that takes time. You know what I mean? When you take it out, it's not something that's instantaneous. So is it a perfect system? Absolutely not. You know what I mean? But nothing is. I mean, when I first started the streets, today is actually 11 years to the day since I graduated the Houston Police Academy.
Nice.
When I first started, we did not have body cams. So you're talking about something that is brand new to law enforcement within the past 5-6 years. And there's still agencies in this United States that don't have them yet because they are expensive, because it takes resources to get them. And I mean, our body camera policy has changed 10 times in, the first, 5 years of us doing this, because you realize, oh, we didn't account for that. And there's a constant change. So I think overall they're a great thing. I think that it's going to keep changing law enforcement. I think that it'll give insight to the citizenry. I think it'll give insight to police officers and what we can do better and use things. And we actually have an eye now where we can see how this officer could have handled it differently. We could see how the interaction went that way based on something else. And we can discern what's true evidence and what's not. And it gives us an extra eye. I'm all for them. I'll end there. Sorry.
No, I actually, man, with everything you said there, there's not much at all that I disagree with from a citizen's perspective, especially when you talk about the fact that it's kind of a two-way street where it provides legitimacy and evidence and kind of some liability on both sides. It kind of a CYA for police. I like it for that regard. I do have some opinions on the grand jury part. I think that's another conversation that can go a long time, because we do have precedent that shows that when it's a police officer involved shooting, the odds of that specific officer to actually be indicted are like way lower than the average citizen.
Oh yeah, by far.
So and that's. And not to say that every time an officer gets involved in an officer-involved shooting, that person should thereby be indicted. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying whenever we have these issues in society, for instance, Breonna Taylor is the one that comes to mind. Like, we're not asking for a conviction just yet. Even with George Floyd, we're not trying to get convicted. We're just trying to get indictment. Like, indictment is the goal, because at least, it can go to a trial at that point. But there are some there's issues regarding the likelihood of successful indictment of police officers no shooting. It's just so rare, and that's part of the accountability problem that I feel like we're trying to get to. But regarding the body cameras, I completely agree. So yeah. Everything you said, I'm with. I can do a sequel to this conversation.
Yeah, I think we can keep talking all day on a bunch of different points. And I think that a lot of it isn't that we're not that far apart.
Yeah,
what we're talking about, but some of the changes, it's all about, when I say perception, that sounds like just a general blanket term on how to do it, and it's so much more complicated than just saying it's based on perception. You know what I mean? But when you talk about we had an incident that was very similar to the Breonna Taylor thing here in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
The Harding Street
with a couple.
The Harding Street raid. But the issue that I'm seeing, and to me, the Harding Street thing was a massive problem, and the officers are getting indicted. I mean, they're going through it all. But did that have the same media attention as Breonna Taylor?
No,
it didn't. And that's because,
is that because there is an indictment? There was an indictment there?
But the indictment still took how long to do the indictment? I mean, it's not like they did that right away. It took months and months and months of them gathering all the evidence before they indicted them.
Yeah.
But
I remember that case, but it happened here. So I know that was, but see I know we can, I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, we can go on forever, but
I remember it.
The point of the matter with no knocks or whatever it is, I mean, you're talking about policy changes that can change something, but it wasn't something where I think that because when people are involved, if there is the racial component, it's easier to spread one way or the other. When the problem is the no-knock warrant, you know what I mean? When the problem is this, but if the example is that to make that emotional plea and that emotional thing to do it, it's going to gain more traction. What happened here was horrible. I mean, it's horrible, and it's caused all types of audit changes and changes to a department and everything else. I don't know the exact details. I'm not a part of the investigation. You know what I mean? Right. But when you hear about Breonna Taylor, when you hear about all this, there needs to be change. There does. You know what I mean? Without a doubt. And I think just on your last podcast, Darryl, when I was listening to you, and you said, you're not in a position of power. Well, I'm hoping, brother, that soon we are. You know what I mean? Like that it's going to be our turn to take the reins from this country, and the people like us will be the ones in charge.
Yeah.
And I mean, just the sad part is, I mean, it seems like a long time when you say 50 years or 60 years ago. I mean, that sounds like a long time.
Sure.
But I mean, 1964, the biggest sweeping change in civil rights was in 1964, and that over the last 200 years. And that was, my math is horrible. I'm a police officer, sorry, but I mean, you're talking 55 years ago, and the two people that are going to be running for, the presidency this year were both in their 20s when that occurred.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the people that are born in a different generation, the people that have those different viewpoints are hopefully going to start progressing to where this changes. And the thing I want to make sure everybody knows is that true generational change takes time. You know what I mean? And it takes people sitting down and having the conversations, knowing that I'm not perfect. I'm going to do stuff wrong. But as long as what I'm doing has the right intent at heart, and that I'm not out for evil, I'm not out for evil against any particular person or class of society or anything else. And I think that we should all be a part of this, and we all have an integral part to make sure that this is a better country for my daughter, for your kids, for everybody out there, that we can do this. This isn't insurmountable. This isn't something crazy. We have the technology. We have the smart people. We have the heart to make the changes that need to happen, as long as people are open to change. And that's a societal problem that we've got to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that whether we like it or not, change is coming. Yeah. And you either deal with it and you be a part of the problem. I mean, you be a part of the solution, not the problem, or you're a part of the problem,
Right.
So I'm still, through all of this climate, through everything going on, I have faith in my brothers and sisters out there that through all this, even through all the hate they're receiving, through everything else, that we are still going to come to work every single day and do everything we can to protect our citizens, protect this country, despite negativity back and forth, whether warranted or unwarranted. It's still negativity when I don't think any negative actions are going to make anything better. We've got to focus on the future, because I can't control what happened back there. I can learn about it. I can make sure I don't make the same mistakes, but I've got to focus on what we do moving forward. And I think that police departments across this country are making changes. It's just not at the level where we are in the United States, where we want instant gratification and a sweeping change right now, when the knee-jerk reactions are probably not what's going to make lasting change. Lasting change comes from us having a desire to make ourselves better.
Yeah. No, I mean, all great points. And I appreciate you both coming on, because I feel that you both are very level-headed. You're educated, you have good opinions, and hopefully it encourages further conversations that are similar to this, because I think that is how the change happens, because you and Darryl are obviously very different people. But if we noticed, you guys are echoing a lot of the same type of things, or you got an idea from Darryl, or Darryl got an idea from you, and you thought about something that you might not have. And so I appreciate you guys coming on. I know it can be a little bit of a vulnerable conversation, but I appreciate it. But very last question, and it's not going to be a long-winded question and or require a long answer. Do we think the Houston Astros win the World Series?
I do. I think that they have enough. Yordan Alvarez is coming back. I think the gang's all here. We need a good stretch from Lance McCullers. But for the most part, it's another year where we don't have any huge weaknesses if our team stays healthy. So the guys go out there and play baseball, 60 games. That's enough for them to shake that rust off. And I'm expecting big things from them. So I bet we go down to the wire with the Yankees, and I bet we see the Dodgers in the World Series, and we take care of them.
All right, my little girl got soaking wet, and she wants to poke her head in here because it's raining outside.
Hello.
Yeah, you okay? You're soaking wet.
I appreciate you having us, Brittany.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yes.
The Astros, we're going to take it. We lost Garrett Cole, but we got Lance McCullers back. So I think overall we're exactly in a good position to do this. We're only a couple outs away from winning it last year, so I don't see why this should be any different.
That's it.
Awesome.
Agreed.
All right. Well, good deal, guys. Go Stros, and have a great rest of your week.
All right, bye, y'all. Thanks, Darryl.
See you. Thanks, Sergeant.